Oh, you think you're safe just because your doors are locked? Stay locked. You're not. The worst kind of intruder doesn't break in through your window. They wait for you to check your security cameras, only to realize they told you that the person standing in your hallway is you. Don't look back. My name is Ethan. I work the night shift as a data analyst for a private cloud storage firm in Seattle. My job is incredibly boring, or at least it used to be. Every night, I spend 8 hours sitting in a dimly lit room, staring at thousands of corrupted video files uploaded by automated security servers from all over the country. My task is simple. Filter out the static, wipe the empty archives, and flag any actual system glitches. It's a mechanical routine that pays remarkably well, and for someone who prefers isolation like me, it was the perfect job. The office is always dead silent after midnight, save for the constant, heavy hum of the massive cooling fans in the server room next door. But 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, at exactly 3:14 a.m., that monotony broke. I stumbled upon an unindexed directory named project_reverie. It didn't have a standard server asset code, it just contained an IP address that seemed to loop back inside our own local network. Driven by curiosity, and to be honest, just trying to stay awake. I clicked the first video file. It was a live stream of a completely empty, windowless concrete basement. In the dead center of the room sat a single wooden chair. There was no movement, no sound, just the low hiss of white noise. I was about to close the tab, assuming it was some abandoned IT test stream, when I noticed the timestamp in the corner of the screen. It wasn't tracking the current time, it was displaying a countdown. 0 hours, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I stared at the countdown, watching the seconds tick away. 00:04:11. 00:04:10. Why would a security feed have a countdown? Driven by pure curiosity, I left the window open on my second monitor while I continued sorting through other data logs. When the countdown hit exactly 1 minute, the video feed shifted. The camera angle didn't change, but the lighting in that concrete room plunged into darkness, replaced by a harsh, flickering red emergency light. And then, someone walked into the frame. My heart took a violent, sickening leap in my chest. The person on the screen was wearing the exact same dark green hoodie I was wearing. He had the same messy brown hair. He walked with the exact same slight limp in his left leg, a remnant of a childhood accident. The person walked straight to the wooden chair, sat down, and buried his face in his hands. He looked utterly terrified, shaking violently. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath fogging the glass. This wasn't a pre-recorded video, the pixel density, the rendering artifacts. This was a live, raw broadcast, and slowly, the camera began to zoom in on his face. And when he finally raised his head and looked directly into the lens, I stopped breathing. It was me. A perfect, molecular duplicate of my own face, staring back at me through the screen. But the eyes were wrong. They were completely bloodshot, the pupils dilated to the very edge of the iris, reflecting a level of absolute despair I have never felt in my life. I sat frozen in my office chair, my mind screaming that this was a trick, a deepfake, designed by a co-worker to mess with the night shift guy. I stood up, determined to go to the bathroom, to splash cold water on my face and clear my head. But as I took a step away from my desk, I caught a glimpse of the monitor again. The digital clone of me on the screen stood up, at the exact same fraction of a second. He snapped his head to his left and staring at an unseen door in his concrete room. He was reacting to something. I bolted out of the room, my shoes echoing loudly against the linoleum floor of the empty corporate building. I rushed into the break room, grabbed a cup of black coffee, and tried to rationalize what I was looking at. A deepfake. It had to be. Maybe they used my ID photo from the company database and mapped it onto an actor. Yeah, that makes sense. Technology is just terrifyingly realistic these days. I forced out a laugh, though it sounded hollow in the empty break room. I spent about 10 minutes trying to calm my racing pulse before walking back to my workstation. I sat down, determined to delete the file and report the breach to the cybersecurity team in the morning. But when I looked at the second monitor, the concrete room was empty. The chair was flipped over. There was blood splattered across the back wall. Not a lot, just 3 smeared, distinct streaks, as if someone had been dragged away while trying to claw at the concrete surface. And right beneath the video player, a new text file had been automatically generated. The title of the file was my actual social security number. I opened it with a shaking hand. Inside, there was only a single line of text. Subject 04 collapsed, commencing synchronization. I didn't sleep that morning. When I got home, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every creak in my apartment building sounded like a hangman's step. I was checking my home security cameras every 5 minutes on my phone. Nothing. My small apartment was quiet. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that red-lit concrete room, the flipped chair, and the sheer terror in my own eyes. I tried to convince myself not to go back to work the next night. I tried calling my manager to check in sick, but he didn't answer. The company has a strict policy about night shift absences without a 24-hour notice. A single unexcused absence meant immediate termination, and I needed the money. I convinced myself that staying home alone, in the dark with my thoughts, would only make the paranoia worse. So, at 11 p.m., I got into my car and drove through the pouring rain back to the office, utterly unaware that the nightmare hadn't even started yet. The second night felt heavier. The air in the office building smelled metallic, almost like burning copper wire. I sat at my desk, refusing to open the second monitor, keeping my eyes locked onto the routine data archives. I pulled off my headphones, wanting to hear the real, physical environment around me. Every shadow cast by the green exit signs looked like a crouching body. By 2A, air arm. The silence became suffocating. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it felt as if the building itself was absorbing all ambient noise, leaving a vacuum that made my ears ring. To break the tension, I decided to check the company's internal employee directory to find contact info for the network admin who handles local IP loops. I typed in my own name first, just to see what permissions my account had. The search bar spun for a long time. When the page finally loaded, my employee ID photo was gone. It had been replaced by a live, thumbnail-sized video stream. It was the concrete room again, but this time, it wasn't empty. I slowly maximized the window. The camera was now positioned at a top-down, high-angle view, looking directly over the wooden chair, which had been set upright once again. Sitting in that chair was me. But this wasn't the terrified, shaking version from the night before. This version was perfectly still. His hands were resting flat on his knees. He was staring straight up into the camera, eyes wide, unblinking, and completely devoid of any human expression. He looked like a mannequin, sculpted out of my own flesh. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Then, the digital clone of me slowly raised his right hand and pointed a single finger, not toward the camera, but toward the right side of the screen. Aiming at something just out of frame, my eyes followed the direction of his finger. On the concrete wall behind him, written in what looked like dark, dried liquid, were the words, "Look under the desk." My entire body seized. The temperature in my actual office felt like it dropped 20 degrees in a heartbeat. I could feel the cold air leaving my throat as I breathed. Look under the desk. I didn't want to. Oh God, I wanted to run out of this building and never look back. But the primal, terrifying curiosity that drives human panic took over. Slowly, inch by inch, I leaned forward in my leather office chair. I gripped the edge of the wooden desk, my knuckles turning white. I lowered my head, slowly, beneath the level of the desktop, into the dark, cramped space where the computer tower and the tangled web of black cables rested. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. I reached into my pocket and clicked on my phone's flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness under the desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. And then, the light hit something solid, tucked away in the furthest back corner. Behind the heavy metal computer tower was a pair of shoes, clean black leather shoes, the exact same shoes I was wearing right now. My flashlight trembled so violently that the beam danced crazily across the floor. I slowly traced the light upward. Blue jeans, dark green fabric, and wedged into the tight gap between the wall and the metal casing was a human torso. Someone was curled into a fetal position under my desk, jammed tightly into the shadows. I couldn't see his face. His head was tucked deep into his chest, hidden by his hood. I let out a sharp, choked gasp and threw myself backward, my chair rolling hard and slamming into the filing cabinets behind me. I dropped my phone, the flashlight now pointing uselessly at the ceiling. I stood there, pressed flat against the wall, my chest heaving, staring at the dark, empty void under my desk. Nothing moved. There was no sound of breathing coming from beneath the table. I realized then that the office wasn't quiet because it was empty. It was quiet because whatever was in that room with me was waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't grab my keys. I bolted for the heavy glass door of the office suite, shoved it open, and sprinted down the long, carpeted hallway toward the elevators. I slammed my hand against the down button, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The elevator doors took an eternity to open. When they did, I threw myself inside and smashed the button for the ground floor. And as the doors began to close, narrowing my view of the hallway, I looked out. At the far end of the corridor, emerging from the darkness of my office suite, was a shape. It was walking with a heavy, distinct limp in its left leg. It wasn't running. It was just walking toward the elevator, its face completely hidden in the shadow of a green hood. The doors sealed shut, just as it crossed the middle of the hallway. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember locking my apartment door, throwing all 3 heavy deadbolts, and dragging my massive wooden wardrobe right behind the entrance. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat on my living room floor with my back against the couch, gripping a kitchen knife in my right hand until my fingers went completely numb. I stayed like that for 3 days. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer my phone. which rang constantly until the battery died. Every call was from an unknown number, but every time the screen lit up, the caller ID displayed a single icon, a tiny pixelated image of a concrete room. By the fourth night, hunger and dehydration had broken my mind. The apartment felt like a tomb. I finally decided I couldn't live like a rat anymore. I needed to know if someone was really out there, and if I had finally surrendered to a severe schizophrenic breakdown. I crawled slowly toward the window, looking out over the foggy, deserted street below. I parted the curtains with 2 fingers and looked down. Standing directly beneath the flickering streetlight across the road was a body. He was just standing there in the rain and staring straight up at my 3rd-floor window. Even through the thick fog and the darkness, I knew exactly who it was. He was wearing my clothes. He had my face. He didn't move an inch. He just stood there, letting the rain soak his green hood, staring up at me with that wide, unblinking, empty expression. I snapped the curtain shut, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I ran to my kitchen, needing to drown out the terror, and turned on the tap to get a glass of water. But the water didn't come out clear. It came out in a thick, dark, rusted sludge, reeking of copper and stagnant earth. I dropped the glass, watching it shatter against the floor tiles. I backed away from the sink when a strange electronic chime echoed from my bedroom. It was the sound my computer makes when it receives a high-priority work notification. But my computer was turned off. I walked into my bedroom, as if I were walking toward a guillotine. The monitor on my desk was glowing, casting a harsh, blinding red light that illuminated the entire room. It showed the familiar interface of the company's cloud database. The video player was open, displaying a live stream. The camera angle was different now. It was an extreme close-up of a human eye. The iris was a familiar brown, but the blood vessels inside were ruptured, forming a chaotic web of crimson lines. And as I watched, the camera slowly began to zoom out. It revealed the concrete room. It revealed the wooden chair, but the chair was empty. The camera continued to pan down, focusing on the floor beneath the chair. There was a small digital terminal resting on the concrete. On its screen, a command line interface was running thousands of code strings per second. And at the very bottom of the terminal, a blinking green cursor appeared, typing out words in real time. Darts. Synchronization status 99.8%. Cool. Physical replacement imminent. Please prepare for the data transfer. And then, echoing through the silent apartment, came the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't the sound of shattering glass. Voice sob. It was the distinct, rhythmic thud of that heavy leather shoes walking inside my bedroom wardrobe. The floorboards groaned beneath a heavy, familiar weight. A weight that moved with an unmistakable, slight limp. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the kitchen knife in my hand trembling so violently that it slipped from my sweaty palm and clattered onto the floor, slowly, agonizingly. The handle of my wardrobe door began to turn downward. The wood groaned as the door was pushed open from the inside, revealing an absolute ink-black void. pale, trembling hand, identical to my own, reached out from the darkness and gripped the doorframe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but my muscles refused to obey. My vision began to pixelate at the edges, turning into a gray static of red and black dots. As the body stepped slowly out into the red glow of my monitor, revealing my own face, with a wide, unnatural smile splitting its cheeks. I realized the horrifying truth. I was no longer the one looking at the camera. I was the data, being erased, and as those dark hands reached for my throat, I knew that tomorrow, a perfect replica of me, would drive my car to work, sit at my desk, and wait for the next file to be opened.